that is important. The one is that we have to ensure balance, we have to ensure accuracy, and of course fairness, and then a diversity of views. I think that is really important to understand. When I was prepping for this discussion, I was, generally if I think I don't know enough, I kind of go to the literature. And what is really interesting is just the kind of evocative media campaigns that exist to entrench stereotypes about a whole range of issues, from heteronormativity to binary conceptions of gender, to issues around race, inequality, privilege. And so I think within those kind of big fissures in society, the media, of course, is not an innocent bystander. And I think from where I'm sitting, certainly at independent media, we accept as a group, as a media group, that we are in a contested space. We accept that we don't speak with one voice in the media. What we serve to do at Independent is to throw open diversity. We challenge our positions around a whole range of things, including the kind of endless depiction of life through particular lenses, whether it is informed by heteronormativity, whether it's informed by class, whether it's informed by race, by language divides, especially in a country like South Africa, and especially in the Southern African context. We're very aware that we don't stand as a fourth estate innocent of the power relations as it exists. So what we've decided in terms of positioning ourselves as a media house is to be very clear about the fact that we are not objective as independent media. And I want to be very categoric about that. And I know that scares a lot of people. It doesn't scare us. Because we accept that every single person involved in our newsroom comes to the news with a worldview and with a perspective and with an experience. What we need to do is to check our blind spots, to interrogate our own prejudices, our own privilege, and bind ourselves to a set of regulations, a set of rules, in the South African case, beautifully espoused in our covenant, often a set of values and rules and obligations that represents our better selves and not who we really are, which brings me back to that contested space. So for us, we are unapologetically South African. We are unapologetically African. We do know that the mainstream media narrative often reinforces prejudice in all its manifestations. And for us at independent media, it is important to push back on those things. But we can't do it alone. We need our readers, we need the people who consume our products to constantly give us really lively interaction and debate. One of the big things, of course, the advent of social media is a great equalizer. It allows people to intervene with speed and in volumes that is remarkable. Many of the current debates in South Africa, on the continent and globally, have been largely impacted in ways that we are yet to be able to quantify, just given the fact that everybody can now be a content producer. Everyone can put a view out there. So there's a great democratization going on. But of course, we accept that we don't speak with one voice. But as a group, we definitely position ourselves on the side of being balanced, of being fair, being accurate, and more importantly, having diverse opinions and views and values reflected in our products and publications.
Thank you very much. Okay. So in short, for whom would you say the media speaks?
Well, I don't think
Is it possible to say that?
We're not called the fourth estate for nothing. We wield incredible power. I think it's naive to think we don't. I think if you also look at the kind of impact that technology and innovation and very tough market conditions have had on the media, you will see that very often it's the privileged, it's the powerful that is still able to dictate largely narratives. We, for example, in our group, put in place a group labor editor, because when we looked at what media generally does around issues of worker interests, we find that worker interests are generally described as irritations and disruptions. There's a way in which mainstream economics is presented as normative. And because of that, we decided to have a decided labor perspective around issues. It doesn't cancel business out, because we understand these intersections around a whole range of issues. But we're very deliberate about who we are as a group. So we don't think we speak for any one particular group. What we want to do is to provide as many opportunities and platforms for people to read as diverse opinions as possible. So, because we don't want to insult those who consume our products. We think that after having read and consumed a whole lot of stuff, people generally are able to make up their own minds. And that's the point for us, to empower people to ultimately decide for themselves.
Any possibility of a sexual orientation and gender identity editor?
I was thinking about it as I was driving here, and I think there's probably a case to be made for a focus in the newsroom. I'm worried if you put someone like that in, you kind of ghettoize the issue, and everything that lands on the desk then becomes the problem of that person. And you need people to interrogate their preferences and their privileges and their prejudices in every aspect of the news. But it's certainly a good place to start. It does provide food for thought. It's certainly something that we will look at in the way in which we take on quite a decided approach to reporting on particular issues. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks, Alice.
Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
And
this is, it's a big topic.
yes.
And coming from the standpoint of a corporate, I think it's even probably deeper and wider, because corporates are problematic generally. Just planting the LGBTI aspect is adding another layer to the complexity. So maybe let me take a couple of steps back, because I think painting a picture of a typical corporate, and I know it's also problematic what I'm going to do, because that's also stereotyping, but I probably am speaking on behalf of the 80%, because I think the 20% progressives are exactly that, the minority. Structurally speaking, corporates they like uniformity, but uniformity is dictated by a certain group. There is a limitation to accepting difference. Top-down approach is typically the way things are done. Anything that is different, anyone who is different, who is other, typically is dealt with through silence. It's a big message. We will pretend as if we don't see you, so you are rendered invisible. I mean, Edwin, you were talking about visibility. We're seeing the direct opposite in a typical corporate space. So if you show up as not fitting into the box, so if you are a triangle in a circle or in a square and you don't quite fit in, you might be adding value in other ways in the organization, so we will pretend we don't see you. But if you are an irritation in other ways, of course there'll be a way to shovel you out of the. There'll be a way to say. There's a term, by the way, that gets used in corporate. They say you are not a corporate fit. That means we can't find a good enough reason for this triangle to be in this circle or in this square, whatever the predetermined shape is of the organization. Let's call it a square. And that is the sort of classic organization, and I think the bulk of them, not only in South Africa, probably throughout Southern Africa certainly, are still within that mode. However, when you view sort of the winds of change, whether it's through globalization or a recognition of studies around leadership, as an example, what is it that a company would ask, or the leadership would ask, is our competitive edge? What is it that's going to differentiate us from the rest? And the issue of diversity is coming up more and more as an area of differentiation. And even though we've started, certainly in South Africa, I mean, the constitutional impetus that we've had since 1994, 1996, has helped a great deal. So when you talk about equity, from an employment equity perspective, the tendency still is typically to talk about gender, race, and then, by the way, disability, that kind of a thing. So disability becomes, bye.
Oh, yes.
But there are typically three things that, and then there's a big full stop at the end. And then, certainly in the space that I occupy, the very high levels of temptation that I enjoy is to go to that section 6 and say, it doesn't only say race, gender, disability, full stop. It lists a whole range of categories, and it's not even a closed set of categories. And by the way, where does that come from? Because it was not the Department of Labor who cooked this up. And we go back to Clause 9 of the Constitution. So if we are not doing these things as an organization, and to the extent that we want to have a competitive edge, and I'm talking about typically progressive organizations, I'm not suggesting that every corporate is having this kind of talk. Other people are just happy with the bottom line, and as long as the ship is afloat, if the rest or some people are rendered invisible, it doesn't seem to bother certain people. But an organization that wants to go that extra mile, you want to take as many of the people that make the organization with you as possible. Certainly all, by all means. Because every single person has a contribution that they're making to the ultimate success of the organization. So it's not this leader person who is making everything happen. So talking about leadership is no longer this square, typically would have come in a suit, probably a black suit, probably black shoes and black socks, but would have looked a certain way. And you go into an exco room and a boardroom, you will see photocopies of the same color coding. And and typically that's groupthink that happens, because we would have grown up in the same area, gone to the same or similar schools, are members of the same clubs, intermarry. But then there are limitations to that. But when we talk about leadership in this progressive organization, we talk about leadership as inclusivity, as I forget the name, the word, being authentic. So leadership is authenticity, because if you're going to come, because the typical old-style square organization that encourages people to fake it, because if you are a triangle and you desperately want to